So the article I'm going to be talking about is the one on media coverage for intervention in Rwanda and Darfur. One of the first parts of the article talked about the schizophrenic cycle of news. It mentioned movies such as Hotel Rwanda and Schindler's List and how these events didn't actually happen this way. Those movies are created for an audience. They have a plot, they have a protagonist, and they usually have a happy or decently happy ending that is really not that realistic for most of the genocide and only kind of existed in one part of it. These movies diminish our feeling of responsibility, and they're used to teach these events in schools, which I think really isn't fair because it doesn't give the event the full acknowledgement that it deserves. The article also talked about the Westerner and how in every newspaper the focus was on the Western man or woman. In class and in the article, we viewed the picture of the woman being saved from a terrifying escape, and it kind of leaves the question of how many black lives are worth a white life, because all those people in the image behind her died. I think kind of going off of that, when the 18 peacekeepers got killed, it's almost like the UN took a moment to reevaluate, like, oh, is this worth it? Because their people got killed, which of course is awful, but then there was these like hundreds of thousands of Tutsi people being murdered. Another thing mentioned in a lot of articles was the inevitability of African genocide, which is really wrong because it's basically instead of making it a conflict between two groups, it's generalizing it to the context of like Africa as a whole, which is really not fair because it was one country. It also, the way the articles talked about it, making them out to be like savages, it impacts the way that the public reacts. They don't feel as responsible because, oh, it's mutual, it's a war, it's not a genocide, which again diminishes our feeling of responsibility in these cases. The article mentions the term white on white violence and how we never use it. However, in this case, we use the term black on black violence instead of genocide, which is what it really was. It again perpetuates the idea of it being their genocide, not ours. However, every article basically ignored the impact of colonialism on Rwanda and blamed it all on the Tutsis and the Hutus. It was their conflict, and it wasn't our fault that this happened, so we're really not responsible for it. I think that this also is really important because it has an impact on the people living in Rwanda now. They've outlawed, of course, like the term Hutu and Tutsi and kind of minimized the talk about this genocide. But growing up, you have these references probably getting your information about this through other sources, which label and stereotype people that were in Rwanda at that time. And you view this issue probably with a little bit of conflict about your own past and your own history. In the case of Darfur, I think this also happens. It's a super politicized case, and countries like Russia and China and Belarus are basically supplying weapons to kill the people and to kind of perpetuate this genocide. And we totally ignore that. We view it as an issue there that's been going on for years. We call it another Rwanda, but have we ever really learned anything if we're just ignoring the fact that this genocide is being perpetuated by us? In a way, maybe not directly, but through things like supplying weapons and just basically like not pushing the UN to really put as much effort as they could into this. I think calling Darfur another Rwanda is also super dangerous because people still kind of misunderstand the events that occurred in Rwanda. For example, they are not sure if it was really a genocide, if it was just a conflict between two tribal groups. It also kind of links one conflict to the other, and they're totally different. We never called Rwanda another Holocaust just because it was a genocide, and just because it takes place in a similar environment or a similar type of the war, it doesn't mean it's another Rwanda. There was also an ad in Darfur that's talked about in the article, and it says, how will history judge us? This perpetuates the idea of Africa as a whole and Darfur and Rwanda needing saving from the white nations, how they can't do this on their own, which isn't really fair since we're the ones partially causing the conflict here. The number of articles in Darfur also super fluctuated between how much the papers needed attention. So when there was nothing else to publish, we published these articles about Darfur and, these crazy statistics about it. And we're basically using it for consumption purposes, which again links back to the idea of it being a schizophrenic cycle of news.